I cannot do this, Jihoon. Her voice was a fragile whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous silence of his penthouse. It was a sound so delicate, he feared the city's heartbeat, thrumming miles below through the panoramic windows, would shatter it completely. He stood frozen, a statue carved from disbelief. Do not say that, Amara. Please. The words were a prayer, torn from a place in his soul he had not known existed until she had carved it open with a simple, genuine smile weeks ago. She shook her head, a slow, heartbreaking motion. Her beautiful, expressive eyes, usually so full of life and defiant light, were clouded with a sorrow that mirrored his own. I have to. This world, your world, it is not mine. I cannot breathe in it. Then I will build you a new one, he said, his voice raw, desperate. He took a step towards her, his hand outstretched, wanting to bridge the chasm that had just ripped open between them. I will give you anything, everything. You cannot give me this, she whispered, placing a hand over her own heart. You cannot give me peace, not when I know what it costs. Her words were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact, a truth so absolute and unyielding it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He felt the foundation of his life, the empire of steel and shadow he commanded, crack beneath his feet. She was choosing to leave. She was choosing her soul over him. And the most agonizing part of it all was that he, the man who could bend cities to his will, understood why. He could not protect her from the darkness that was his birthright. He was the darkness. 3 months earlier, Kwon Ji-hoon had been a king surveying a kingdom of ghosts. The restaurant was a gilded cage, its air thick with the cloying sense of expensive perfume and even more expensive ambition. He sat at the head of a long table, a silent monolith in a bespoke suit that felt more like armor than clothing. Across from him, the daughter of a shipping magnate smiled a smile so polished it reflected the light of the crystal chandelier above. But her eyes were calculators, tallying the worth of the Kwon name. She was the 47th. The 47th heiress his father, Chairman Kwon, had paraded before him in a relentless campaign for a strategic union. Each one was a variation on a theme. Beautiful, impeccably educated, and utterly empty to him. They looked at him and saw the future of the Phoenix Consortium, a sprawling chaebol with roots that sank deep into the legitimate world of commerce and deeper still into the shadowed soil of Seoul's underworld. They did not see the man. They saw a throne. He felt a familiar weariness settle over him, a cloak of profound, soul-crushing loneliness. His life was a gilded prison, its bars forged from duty and legacy. He took a sip of his water, the ice clinking against the glass with a sound that felt as brittle as his own spirit. His gaze drifted, scanning the room for any distraction, any flicker of authenticity in this stage-managed performance. And then he saw her. She was a waitress, moving between tables with a focused grace that seemed to carve a path through the suffocating atmosphere. She was not like the other women in the room. Her beauty was not a static, posed thing. It was alive, kinetic. It was in the determined set of her jaw, the way a stray curl escaped her tightly bound hair to kiss her temple, the quiet confidence in her hands as she cleared a table. He watched as a boorish man at a nearby table snapped his fingers, a sound of casual arrogance that set Ji-hoon's teeth on edge. The waitress, Amara, according to her name tag, did not flinch. She approached the table, her posture straight, her expression neutral. The man complained loudly about his wine, his voice laced with condescension. Ji-hoon expected to see her shrink, to offer a placating, servile apology. It was the way of the world he knew. The powerless appeased the powerful. But she did not. She listened patiently, her head tilted slightly. When the man finished his tirade, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of apology. It was a smile of supreme, unassailable confidence. "I am so sorry you feel that way, sir," she said, her voice clear and calm. "Perhaps your palate is simply too sophisticated for our house selection." There was a beat of stunned silence. The man's face flushed a blotchy red. Before he could retort, she had already plucked the glass from his hand. "I will bring you some water. On the house." She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight. Ji-hoon felt it then. A jolt, sharp and electric, like a live wire pressed against his heart. The entire room, with its clatter of silver and hum of meaningless conversation, faded into a dull, muted blur. All that existed was her, the woman who had met power with poise, arrogance with a blade of perfectly delivered wit. In a world of phantoms, she was the only real thing he had seen in years. Time seemed to stretch and warp. He saw every detail, the slight sheen of perspiration on her brow from the heat of the service, the strength in the line of her neck, the way her dark eyes seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It was not love at first sight, it was recognition. A part of his soul, dormant and starved, recognized a kindred strength in hers. "Ji-hoon?" The heiress's voice broke the spell, pulling him back to the suffocating present. "Is something wrong?" He turned to her, but he did not really see her. He saw only the afterimage of the waitress. "Everything is wrong," he said, the words coming out colder than he intended. He stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the marble floor. "The meeting is over," he announced to the table, his voice leaving no room for argument. He threw a black credit card onto the table, not waiting to see the stunned faces of his father's associates. His gaze was already sweeping the room again, searching. He found her near the service station, refilling a water pitcher. His second-in-command, Min-jun, materialized at his elbow, ever present, ever watchful. "Sir, is there a problem?" "Find out who she is," Ji-hoon commanded, his voice low and intense. He gave a subtle nod in her direction. Min-jun's eyes followed his. He saw the waitress. His expression remained impassive, but a flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. He had seen his boss dismiss dozens of the world's most eligible women without a second glance. This was new. "Her name," Ji-hoon repeated, his focus absolute. "Everything." That night, he did not sleep. He stood at the window of his penthouse. The city lights spread below him like a carpet of fallen stars, and he thought of a smile that was not meant for him, and a strength that had called to his own. Amara wiped the last table, the repetitive circular motion a familiar comfort at the end of a long shift. Her muscles ached, a dull throb that had become a constant companion in her life. 2 jobs, mountains of student debt, and the relentless hustle of the city. It was a grind that threatened to wear her down to nothing, but she refused to let it. Her roommate and best friend, Maya, was waiting for her by the employee lockers, scrolling through her phone. "So, did you see him?" Maya asked, not looking up. "See who? Mr. My palate is too sophisticated?" Amara mimicked, rolling her eyes. "I thought his wife was going to spontaneously combust from secondhand embarrassment." "No, not him." Maya finally looked up, her eyes wide. "The god! The one at the big table in the back. The one who was staring at you like you were the last glass of water in a desert." Amara paused, her hand on her locker. She had felt the stare. It had been like a physical touch, a heavy, intense weight on her skin that had made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. It was unnerving, but also strangely compelling. She had glanced over once, briefly, and had been met with a pair of dark, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her uniform, right through the tired waitress facade, and into something deeper. The man was devastatingly handsome, in a severe, almost dangerous way. He wore his power like the perfectly tailored suit on his back. Men like that were trouble. Men like that saw the world and everything in it as something to be bought. He was probably trying to figure out if he'd seen me on a most wanted poster. Amara deflected, pulling her street clothes out of her locker. Rich guys get nervous around people who look like they might have to work for a living. Rich is an understatement, Ama. That was Kwon Ji-hoon. The name meant nothing to Amara. Maya's jaw dropped. You've never heard of Kwon Ji-hoon? The Phoenix Consortium? He basically owns half the city, and the other half is afraid of him. Rumor has it his family is complicated. Complicated is a nice word for criminal, Amara muttered, changing out of her uniform. The intense stare made more sense now. He was a predator, sizing up his environment. She was just a small, uninteresting part of the scenery. Well, he can have his complicated rich guy life. I've got rent to pay. She thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. He came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. He always sat alone, always in her section, at a small, unassuming two-top in the corner. He did not demand or command. He just watched. It started to get under her skin. The other staff noticed. Whispers followed her as she moved through the restaurant. He's here for you, they'd hiss, a mixture of envy and awe in their voices. On the fourth night, she decided she'd had enough. She approached his table, her notepad held like a shield. Welcome back, she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Will it be your usual, staring with a side of unnerving silence? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a startling, unexpected warmth. It was a smile like a punch to the chest. I will have the ribeye, he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through her. And 5 minutes of your time after your shift. I'm busy, she said automatically. I will pay for your time, he stated, as if it were the most natural transaction in the world. Anger, sharp and hot, flared in her chest. My time is not for sale, Mr. Kwon. She used his name deliberately, letting him know she knew who he was. And for the record, this is creepy. The whole showing up every night, the staring, it's creepy. He did not look offended. He looked intrigued. Is it? He tilted his head, his dark eyes holding hers. My apologies. My intention was not to be creepy. It was to be persistent. There's a fine line. Then tell me where it is, and I will be sure to stand on the correct side of it, he said, his sincerity disarming her. 1 coffee, not here, somewhere of your choosing, so you can see I am not a monster. Amara's mind screamed at her to say no. He was everything she was wary of, immense wealth, unchecked power, a world of secrets she could not even begin to imagine. But her heart, that foolish, traitorous muscle, was curious. There was a loneliness in his eyes, a profound isolation that she, in her own way, recognized. Tomorrow, she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could stop it. 3 o'clock, the daily grind on 12th Street. And you're paying, because I'm broke, not because I'm for sale. The smile that broke across his face this time was not a ghost. It was pure, unadulterated sunlight, and it lit up every dark and weary corner of her soul. I know, he said softly. Ji-hoon felt a tremor of something dangerously close to hope. It was an unfamiliar sensation, and it terrified him as much as it thrilled him. For 3 days, he had been systematically dismantling his own life in his mind, trying to find a way to make space for her. He had Minjun's report on his desk. Amara Jones, 26 years old, an orphan, raised by a grandmother who had passed away 3 years prior, graduated from a state university with a degree in art history, now buried under a mountain of student loans, worked as a waitress at night and a barista in the mornings, lived in a cramped apartment with a roommate, no criminal record, no significant relationships, a life of quiet struggle and fierce independence. He read the file and felt a pang of something he could only identify as shame. He had more money in a single bank account than she would likely see in 10 lifetimes, and yet she possessed a richness of spirit he could only dream of. He arrived at the daily grind 15 minutes early, dressed in simple dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater. He had left his usual driver and security detail 2 blocks away, a decision that made Minjun profoundly unhappy. "This is unwise, sir," Minjun had protested. "Being near her is the first wise thing I have done in a decade," Ji-hoon had replied. The coffee shop was small and crowded, filled with the rich aroma of roasted beans and the low hum of conversation. It felt real, grounded. He chose a small table in the corner and waited, his heart thumping with the rhythm that felt like a teenager's. When she walked in, she was not wearing her uniform. She wore worn-out jeans, a faded band t-shirt, and a frayed denim jacket. She looked young, beautiful, and so completely out of his league it was laughable. He felt a sudden sharp spike of insecurity. What was he doing here? A kingpin playing at being a normal man. The entire charade felt fragile, destined to shatter. She saw him, and her steps faltered for a moment. He could see the wariness in her eyes, the internal debate. Then she took a breath and walked towards him, her chin held high. "You came," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him. "You thought I would not?" he asked. "I thought you might send an assistant," she retorted, a flash of her sharp wit returning. He laughed, a real laugh that felt rusty from disuse. "No, I do not delegate the important things." The coffee was bitter and strong. The conversation was stilted at first. She asked him questions that were more like interrogations. "What do you do, exactly, besides own things?" "I run my family's company," he said, the answer both true and a massive lie of omission. "We are in shipping, construction, technology." "And complicated things?" she asked, echoing Maya's words. His gaze did not waver. "Yes, complicated things too." He expected her to press, to demand details. Instead, she changed the subject. She told him about her dream of opening a small gallery for emerging artists, a place that was not about money, but about passion. As she spoke, her entire being lit up. Her hands moved, painting pictures in the air. Her eyes shone with a fire that he wanted to warm his hands by for the rest of his life. He was utterly, irrevocably lost. This one coffee turned into another. It turned into walks in the park, visits to obscure museums she loved, and late-night talks on a bench overlooking the river. He learned the cadence of her laughter and the things that made her eyes flash with anger, injustice, cruelty, arrogance. She learned the cracks in his armor. She saw the lonely boy who had inherited a crown he never asked for. One evening, he found out through Minjun that she was a month behind on her rent and was facing eviction. The information was delivered to him on a sterile sheet of paper, but it felt like a physical blow. The thought of her, so proud and resilient, being thrown out onto the street filled him with a cold, protective rage. He acted without thinking. He had the debt cleared through a series of anonymous shell corporations. It was untraceable, or so he thought. 2 days later, she called him. Her voice was ice. "Meet me, now." She was waiting for him at their spot by the river, a furious goddess backlit by the setting sun. She held up an eviction notice that had been rescinded. "Was this you?" He could not lie to her. "Yes." "I told you I am not for sale," she cried, her voice cracking with a mixture of fury and humiliation. "I told you I do not need your charity. What do you not understand about that? You think you can just throw your money at my problems and make them go away? That you can buy me?" "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He stepped closer, invading her space, forcing her to look at him. It was not charity. It was not a purchase. It was an impulse. The thought of you being hurt, of you being in distress. I could not bear it. It had nothing to do with money, Amara. It had to do with you. Her anger seemed to falter, the wall of her fury crumbling under the raw honesty in his eyes. Tears welled, shimmering on her lower lashes. "It's not fair," she whispered. "You can't just do that." "I know," he said, his heart aching for her. "I am sorry. I overstepped. But I would do it again. I would burn the world down to keep you safe." The words hung in the air between them, a vow so absolute it scared them both. She looked at him, her defenses finally completely gone. In that moment, he was not Kwon Ji-hoon, the feared head of the Phoenix Consortium. He was just a man, desperately in love with the woman standing in front of him. She closed the small distance between them and kissed him. It was not a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of surrender, of frustration, of a desperate, undeniable connection that defied all logic. It was fire and relief, and for Ji-hoon, it was the moment his life truly began. In the weeks that followed, they were inseparable. He showed her his world, but not all of it. He showed her the opulence, the breathtaking views from his penthouse, the effortless power of his name. She, in turn, kept him grounded in hers, reminding him of the simple joy of a shared pizza on the floor of her tiny apartment, of the beauty in a street musician's mournful song. He knew he was living on borrowed time. The lie of omission between them grew larger each day, a shadowy canyon threatening to swallow them whole. He could not build a future on a foundation of secrets. He loved her too much for that. He had to tell her everything. He had to give her the choice, even if it meant losing her. He chose a night when the city was quiet, a rare blanket of snow muffling its relentless roar. He made dinner himself in the vast, sterile kitchen of his penthouse, a simple meal he had learned she liked. The entire evening felt heavy with unspoken words. After they ate, he led her to the living area. The floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the glittering, snow-dusted skyline like a diamond necklace laid on black velvet. "I need to tell you something," he began, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "The truth about the complicated things." Amara sat on the plush white sofa, her expression growing guarded. She sensed the shift in him, the gravity of the moment. She simply nodded, her eyes fixed on his face. He did not soften the blow. He did not dress it in euphemisms. He told her about his grandfather, the man who had founded the Phoenix Consortium on the back of illegal gambling, loan sharking, and violence. He told her about his father, who had expanded the empire, laundering the dark money through legitimate businesses until the lines between legal and illegal were so blurred they were meaningless. He told her about the rivals, the turf wars that were fought not in boardrooms, but in dark alleys, the blood that had been shed to protect their power. And he told her about his role, the heir, trained from boyhood to take the throne, the decisions he had made, the things he had done. The scar that traced a thin white line above his eyebrow was not from a childhood fall. It was from a knife during a negotiation that had gone sour when he was 19. The tattoos hidden beneath his expensive shirts were not art. They were markers of allegiance and deeds done in the shadows. "The money that paid your rent," he said, his voice hollow. "It is not clean. None of it is. My hands, they are not clean. I am the head of a criminal organization, Amara. That is the truth of what I am." He finished speaking, and the silence that descended was absolute. It was heavier than the snow, colder than the winter night. He watched her face, searching for a sign, a flicker of something, but her expression was unreadable, a mask of shock. She did not cry, she did not scream. She just sat there, the vibrant, fiery woman he had fallen in love with, looking small and fragile against the backdrop of his monstrous life. He had laid his rotten soul at her feet. Now, he could only wait for her to walk away from it. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. Each word Ji-hoon spoke was a hammer blow, systematically demolishing the beautiful, fragile worlds they had built together. A criminal organization, loan sharking, violence. The words echoed in the stunning, silent room, grotesquely out of place amidst the fine art and breathtaking views. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the two versions of the man before her. The one who listened with quiet intensity as she talked about obscure painters. The one whose eyes held a profound loneliness that called to her own. The one whose touch felt like coming home. And this other man, a kingpin, a gangster. A man whose hands were, by his own admission, stained. She felt a wave of nausea. The beautiful penthouse suddenly felt like a cage, its gilded bars suffocating her. The luxury that had once seemed impressive now felt obscene, built on the suffering of others. The money that had saved her from eviction was tainted, a product of the very exploitation and cruelty she despised. She looked at him. He stood before her, stripped bare, his face pale and his posture rigid, bracing for the inevitable verdict. There was no arrogance in him now, only a raw, desperate vulnerability. He had given her the ugliest parts of himself, a testament in its own twisted way to how much he cared. He had trusted her with the truth that could destroy him. But trust could not change what that truth was. She started, but her voice caught in her throat. What could she say? How could she articulate the storm of horror, betrayal, and heartbreak raging inside her? She felt like a fool, a naive, stupid girl who had let herself be charmed by a handsome face and a sad story, ignoring all the warning signs. Maya's words came back to her. He basically owns half the city, and the other half is afraid of him. She had thought it was an exaggeration. She finally found her voice, but it was a stranger's, thin and brittle. I need to go. She stood up on shaky legs. The movement seemed to break Ji-hoon's paralysis. He took a step toward her, his face a mask of anguish. Amara, please, he begged, his voice cracking. Say something, yell at me, hit me, anything but this. What do you want me to say? She shot back, a spark of her old fire returning, fueled by pain. Congratulations? Thank you for being honest about the fact that you're a crime lord? I can't, Ji-hoon. I can't do this. This was the moment she would remember later. The moment that would play in her mind on a loop. The raw despair on his face. The way he looked as if she had physically ripped his heart from his chest. This was the moment from the cold open of their tragedy. I cannot do this, Ji-hoon, she said again, the words feeling more real, more final. Do not say that, Amara, please. His plea was a raw wound. She shook her head, tears finally blurring her vision. I have to. This world, your world, it is not mine. I cannot breathe in it. Her principles, her very identity, were built on a foundation of empathy and a belief in fairness. To stay with him would be to betray every part of herself. It would be a slow suicide of the soul. Then I will build you a new one, he said, his desperation making him reckless. I will give you anything, everything. The tragic futility of his offer broke her heart all over again. You cannot give me this, she whispered, her hand instinctively going to her chest. You cannot give me peace, not when I know what it costs. She had to get out, before she broke, before she did something stupid, like forgive him, like stay. She turned and walked towards the private elevator, each step feeling like she was wading through wet cement. She could feel his eyes on her back, a burning, desperate gaze. She did not look back. If she looked back, she would be lost. The elevator doors slid shut, encasing her in a mirrored box. She saw her reflection, a pale, tear-streaked woman she barely recognized. The doors closed on his shattered face, an image that would be seared into her memory forever. As the elevator descended, she finally let out a sob, a ragged, ugly sound that was torn from the depths of her soul. She had fallen in love with a monster, and he had broken her heart by telling her the truth. For Ji-hoon, the closing of the elevator doors was the sound of the world ending. The silence Amara left behind was not empty. It was filled with the screaming of his own failure. He had known this was a risk. He had known her goodness could not coexist with his darkness. But a foolish, hopeful part of him had dared to believe love could bridge any gap. He was wrong. He did not move for a long time. He just stood there, in the center of his vast, empty life, and let the pain wash over him. It was a cold, endless ocean, and he let it drown him. He had offered her a new world, but he knew, even as he said it, that he was a liar. He could not change what he was. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a constant refrain from his childhood. You are a Kwan. Duty is your blood. Power is your birthright. There is no other path. The next day, a switch flipped inside him. The man who had laughed with Amara in a crowded coffee shop was gone. In his place was the cold, ruthless kingpin his father had always wanted him to be. The heartbreak did not soften him. It tempered him into something harder, sharper, and more dangerous than before. He went to a meeting with a rival faction that had been encroaching on their territory. The negotiations had been stalled for weeks. Ji-hoon walked into the room, his face an emotionless mask, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He did not negotiate, he dictated terms. His demands were brutal, absolute, and non-negotiable. When the rival leader balked, Ji-hoon smiled, a chilling, predatory baring of teeth that held no warmth. You seem to be under the impression that you have a choice, Ji-hoon said, his voice quiet, almost conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. Within an hour, the rivals had capitulated completely. Minjun watched the transformation with a heavy heart. He saw the efficiency, the brutal decisiveness, and he knew it was born from a pain so profound it had extinguished the light in his friend's soul. Chairman Kwan was delighted. Finally, the old man had boomed, clapping Ji-hoon on the shoulder. The fire is back in your belly. I was worried that girl had made you soft. Ji-hoon had simply looked at his father, his expression so cold and empty that the chairman's smile faltered. Do not speak of her, he said, and the threat in those 4 words was so potent that his father never mentioned Amara's name again. But Ji-hoon's life became a living hell. He had the power, the wealth, the fear and respect of his entire world, and it was all ash in his mouth. Every night he would return to the penthouse, and the silence would scream her name. He would stand by the window and see not the glittering city, but her face, her smile, the light in her eyes as she talked about her dreams. He had chosen his crown over his queen, and now he was left to rule over a kingdom of dust. Amara's life also fell apart, just in a quieter, more mundane way. She quit her job at the restaurant immediately. She could not bear to walk into that room, to see the table where he had sat, to field the inevitable questions from her coworkers. She picked up more hours at the coffee shop, working until she was so exhausted she could fall into bed and sleep without dreaming. But it was no use. Everything reminded her of him. The brand of coffee he drank, a man on the street wearing a cashmere sweater, the sound of a low, rumbling laugh from a nearby table. Each small thing was a fresh stab to her heart. You need to get over him, Maya said gently one night, finding Amara staring blankly at the wall in their small living room. He was bad news, Amma. You know that. You did the right thing. I know, Amara whispered. I know. I know. She repeated the words like a mantra, trying to convince herself. But the heart is a stubborn, illogical thing. Doing the right thing had never felt so wrong. Her principles were intact, but her spirit was broken. She had called her mother, hoping for comfort. Instead, she got a lecture. I told you to be careful with men like that, Amara, her mother had said, her voice laced with a mixture of concern and, I told you so. Oil and water, baby. That's what you two are. You stick to your own kind. The words, meant to be protective, only made her feel more alone. Months passed. The sharp, acute pain of the breakup slowly dulled into a chronic, hollow ache. She was surviving, but she was not living. The fire inside her, the one Ji-hoon had seen and loved, had been reduced to a faint ember. She stopped talking about her gallery dream. It seemed like a fantasy from another lifetime, belonging to a different, happier woman. She was a ghost, haunting the edges of her own life. And across the city, in a glass tower, so was he. Two halves of a whole, wandering incomplete in their self-imposed exiles. The breaking point for Ji-hoon came on a cold, rainy Tuesday, 6 months after Amada had left. He was in a meeting in the main boardroom, the one that overlooked the entire city. His father was presenting a new, audacious plan to muscle in on the Port Authority, a move that was guaranteed to be bloody and brutal. The younger executives around the table were rapt, their faces glowing with avaricious ambition. Ji-hoon looked at their faces, and he felt nothing but disgust. He looked out the window at the rain-streaked city, and he thought about Amara walking through these streets, her head held high, trying to make an honest living in a world that was so often dishonest. He thought about the life he was leading, the legacy of violence and fear he was perpetuating. He thought about the man he had become since she left, a colder, emptier version of himself. And he realized, with a clarity that was like a physical blow, that this was not a life. It was a slow, elaborate death. His father had been wrong. Power was not his birthright. Amara was. Her love, her light, her goodness, that was the only thing worth having. And he had let it go to protect a kingdom he now realized he despised. In that moment, a decision formed in his mind, solid and absolute. He would not just try to be worthy of her. He would burn his world down and build a new one from the ashes, a world she could breathe in. He stood up. The entire room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. His father paused mid-sentence, an annoyed look on his face. Ji-hoon, do you have something to add? Yes, Ji-hoon said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that was different from the one he usually commanded. This was not the authority of a kingpin. It was the authority of a man who had finally found his purpose. This is over, he announced. A confused murmur rippled through the room. What is over? His father demanded, his eyes narrowing. All of it, Ji-hoon said, his gaze sweeping over the predatory faces around the table. The loan sharking, the extortion, the trafficking of influence and fear. As of today, the Phoenix Consortium is going legitimate. 100%. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with shock and disbelief. Then his father laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Have you lost your mind? Are you insane? This is our family. This is our legacy. This is a prison, Ji-hoon countered, his voice like steel. And I am walking out of the cell. Any and all illegal operations will be severed. We will liquidate the assets, pay what we need to pay, and cut ties with anyone who refuses to come into the light. From now on, we will be a company our children can be proud of, not one they have to hide from. The mention of children, so out of place in this den of vipers, hung in the air. Chairman Kwan's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. You cannot do this. I am still the chairman. I built this empire. You built a house on a graveyard, Ji-hoon retorted, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. And I will not be buried in it. I am the acting head of this organization. My orders will be followed. Anyone who stands in my way, he looked directly at his father, will be removed, by force if necessary. It was a declaration of war, a coup. He was dismantling his own kingdom, piece by bloody piece. He knew it would be a battle. Old alliances would turn into new enmities. There would be threats, violence, betrayals. Many would not survive the transition. But for the first time in his life, He was fighting for something he truly believed in. He was fighting for her. He walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, leaving chaos in his wake. Minjun was waiting for him outside the door, his face pale but his eyes resolute. "That was," Minjun began, struggling for words. "The beginning," Jihoon finished. "Are you with me?" Minjun looked at the man he had served his entire adult life. He saw the pain, the desperation, but he also saw a conviction that had been missing for months. He saw his friend again. "To the end," Minjun said with a solemn nod. The war for the soul of the Phoenix Consortium began that day. It was fought not with guns in alleys, but with lawyers in boardrooms, with forensic accountants digging through decades of filth, with quiet, threatening meetings where Jihoon cut off men who had been his family's allies for generations. It was a dangerous, painstaking, and bloody process. Threats were made against his life. His father used every tool at his disposal to undermine him, turning old loyalists against him. But Jihoon was relentless. He was fueled by a single burning image, Amara's face. He was not just cleaning a company, he was trying to cleanse his soul. He worked around the clock, surviving on coffee and sheer force of will. He sold off the nightclubs, the high-interest loan businesses, the construction companies that ran on intimidation. He poured the money into legitimate tech startups and green energy, restructuring the entire portfolio. It took nearly a year of battle, of threats, of walking a razor's edge. There were casualties. Some of his father's oldest and most dangerous lieutenants simply disappeared. A final, brutal house cleaning that Minjun handled with quiet efficiency. Finally, one autumn afternoon, Minjun walked into his office and placed a single, final report on his desk. "It's done," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and relief. "The last of the shadow assets has been liquidated. We're clean." Jihoon looked at the report. He felt the weight of a dynasty lift from his shoulders. He was no longer a kingpin. He was just a man who had dismantled his own dark legacy, a man who had made a grand, impossible gesture of change. Now, he had to see if it was enough. He did not go to her himself. He did not want to pressure her, to show up like a specter from her past. He wrote a letter, his hand shaking slightly as he held the pen. It was a simple, humble letter. It did not make excuses or grand promises. It just stated the facts. He told her what he had done, what he had dismantled, and why. "I did it for you," he wrote. "I chose you. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if I can ever be worthy of you, but I had to try. If you are willing, I would like the chance to show you the man I am trying to become." He gave the letter to Minjun. "Take this to her," he said. "Do not give it to her roommate. Give it only to her, then leave. The next move is hers." Minjun found her at the coffee shop. She looked tired, thinner than he remembered. The light in her eyes dimmed. He approached her quietly as she was wiping down the counter. "Miss Jones?" Amara looked up, a flicker of recognition and alarm in her eyes. She remembered him from Jihoon's side. Her posture immediately stiffened. "He sent this for you," Minjun said softly, holding out the envelope. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry for everything." He placed the envelope on the counter and walked out before she could respond, leaving her staring at the crisp white paper as if it were a bomb. Amara's hand trembled as she picked up the envelope. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. For a year she had tried to bury him, to forget him, to cauterize the wound he had left behind. And now, here he was, a ghost reaching out from the past. She waited until her shift was over, until she was back in the fragile privacy of her own room before she dared to open it. Her fingers fumbled with the seal. The letter inside was written on simple, plain paper, not the heavy, embossed stationery she associated with him. The handwriting was strong, precise, but she could see the slight tremor in some of the lines. She read it once, then she read it again, the words blurring through her tears. I did it for you. I chose you. It couldn't be true. It was impossible. Dismantling a criminal empire? It was the stuff of movies, not real life. It had to be a trick, a lie, another one of his grand, manipulative gestures designed to pull her back in. Her mind, conditioned for self-preservation, screamed at her to be cynical, to protect herself. But her heart desperately wanted to believe. She spent the next 2 days in a state of turmoil. She went online, digging into the financial news, searching for information about the Phoenix Consortium. What she found stunned her. Article after article detailed the shocking, unprecedented restructuring of the corporate giant. They spoke of a brutal but brilliant campaign by the new head, Kwon Ji-hoon, to sever ties with the company's murky past. They detailed the sale of dozens of subsidiaries, the massive shift into legitimate, transparent industries, and the public, bitter feud with his father, Chairman Kwon, who had been forcibly ousted from the board. It was real. He had actually done it. He had burned his world down. For her, the sheer scale of it was staggering. The risk he had taken, the war he must have fought, all of it, culminating in this simple, humble letter. He was not demanding she come back. He was not promising her a perfect life. He was just asking for a chance. She looked around her small, drab room, at the life she had been living for the past year. A life of safety, of principle, of quiet, gnawing emptiness. She had chosen her soul over him, but in doing so, she had lost a part of it anyway. He had done the impossible. He had changed. Could she be brave enough to do the same? Could she be brave enough to trust again? She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the number she had never been able to bring herself to delete. With a deep, shuddering breath, she sent a simple 2-word text. Where? When? His reply came almost instantly. Our bench, by the river, now. It was a cold evening, the autumn air crisp and sharp. He was already there when she arrived, standing by the water's edge, his back to her. He was not wearing one of his immaculate suits or expensive sweaters. He was in a simple dark coat, his shoulders slumped slightly, as if under a great weight. He must have heard her footsteps because he turned. The sight of him stole her breath. He looked different. The arrogant power was gone, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. But the coldness in his eyes, the emptiness she had seen in their last moments together, was also gone. In its place was a fragile, desperate hope that mirrored her own. They stood in silence for a long moment, the chasm of the past year between them. You did it, she finally whispered, the words sounding inadequate. You really did it. I told you I would build you a new world, he said, his voice hoarse. This one, it's still under construction. And it's not as shiny as the old one. But it's clean. You can breathe here. Tears streamed down her face, cold on her cheeks. Ji-hoon. He took a hesitant step towards her, then another, closing the distance between them. He raised a hand as if to touch her face, but then let it drop, his uncertainty a palpable thing. I love you, Amada, he said, the words raw and stripped of all artifice. I loved you then, and I love you now. I have been in hell without you. If you still can't, if this isn't enough, I will understand. I will let you go and I will never bother you again. But I had to try. She looked into his eyes, into the soul of the man who had torn down an empire for her, and she saw her future. She saw a difficult, complicated, but beautiful future. She saw a man who had been redeemed not by magic, but by a choice. The choice to be better. the choice to love her more than he loved his power. She didn't answer with words. She surged forward, wrapping her arms around his neck, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of surrender or frustration like the first time. It was a kiss of reunion, of forgiveness, of a love that had been tested by fire and had survived. It was desperate and deep, a frantic, passionate affirmation that their separation was finally over. His arms came around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, as if he feared she might disappear if he let go. It was a kiss that tasted of heartbreak and hope, of painful endings and new beginnings. It was the kiss of coming home. 2 years later, the city was celebrating the grand opening of the Chrysalis Gallery. It was a small but exquisitely curated space in a trendy, revitalized neighborhood. Its mission was to showcase emerging, underrepresented artists. Its owner was Amara Jones. She stood in the middle of the bustling room, a glass of champagne in her hand, her heart full to bursting. Her dream, the one she had thought was dead, was alive and thriving around her. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, and her smile was the brightest thing in the room. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "You did it," Ji-hoon whispered in her ear, his voice full of love and pride. She leaned back against him, feeling the solid, comforting strength of his chest. "We did it," she corrected softly. Their journey had not been easy. Rebuilding a life from the ashes of another was a messy, complicated business. There were still shadows, still echoes of the past. His father had never forgiven him, and some threats still lingered on the periphery of their world. But they faced it together. The Phoenix Consortium was now a global leader in green technology, a company that healed more than it hurt. Ji-hoon was a different man. The intensity was still there, but it was now channeled into his work, into his protection of her, into his love for her. The loneliness was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady joy. He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes searching hers. "Are you happy?" he asked. It was a question he still asked her often, a quiet check-in, a reminder that he would never take her peace for granted. "I'm more than happy," she said, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. The faint scar above his eyebrow was a reminder of the man he had been, but the warmth in his eyes was the man he had become. "I'm home." He smiled, that rare, breathtaking smile that was reserved only for her, and lowered his head to kiss her. In the midst of the art and the laughter and the celebration of new beginnings, they were the center of their own universe, a testament to the fact that even the most broken king could be redeemed, not by a crown or a kingdom, but by the resilient heart of a woman who dared to believe he could be more. True love does not demand that we change. It inspires us to become the best version of ourselves. It shows us that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about building a better future, and that the greatest empires are not built of power and wealth, but of trust, sacrifice, and a love strong enough to burn down the world and build a new one in its place. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. Please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel for more stories like this, and sharing it with someone who appreciates tales of love and redemption. What did you think of Ji-hoon's decision to tell Amara the truth? Was it a mistake, or the only way he could truly love her? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, who would you like to see find their own love story? A. Minjun, the loyal second-in-command who deserves his own happiness. B. Maya, Amara's supportive best friend who is still looking for her own epic romance. Vote in the comments.